Usually when I do a class ranking video in the Lord of the Rings Online, I rank the classes as a whole, but some classes really shine through with particular specializations or trait builds. So today we are going to highlight some specific builds in LOTRO that are great for leveling with this top 10 list. With 11 classes and 31 specs to choose from, there are a lot of options and it can be really difficult to narrow it down. A good leveling build, one, needs to be versatile so you can actually safely and easily go through all the content in the game. And then two, it will also have to be mobile so you can quickly go around Middle Earth, both in combat and out of combat. And finally, the top builds should do top damage for obvious reasons. Now, as usual, I must make the disclaimer that I think the top build is the one that you have the most fun with, but more seriously, I hope that a ranking video like this may help you choose a class and give you some motivation for different builds while you level in LOTRO. Also, shout out to I Love Fried Orc, yum, because we will be using their website to make these builds to showcase. Starting off the list, we have number 10 with the Red Line Burglar. When we think of the Burglar class as a whole, the main thing they will bring is decent damage, especially burst damage, which is useful while leveling, and they will also bring quite a bit of versatility and utility to combat. More specific to this Redline Burglar build, it has some great damage, but that is really the only other benefit it offers. Unfortunately, to be competitive with the top leveling specs in LOTRO, you will have to do more than what the Redline Burglar brings. That said, with their utility and damage, that was enough to get them to number 10 out of 31, so it's not all that bad. You also do have the advantage of being able to sneak into quest camps just to get to the end objective, but often that takes just about as long trying to sneak through it than just running through it with a very high damage class that can do a lot of AoE. Additionally, for mobility, the Burglar doesn't really have great travel options. And with that, we'll move to number 9 on the list, which is the Redline Hunter. Now, we know that the Hunter is overall a great class for leveling 1 because they have their travel abilities, both Find the Path, which is their out-of-combat speed boost, and they have all their port skills all around Middle Earth. So they're off to a great start. They also do have great damage, and that is really where the Redline Hunter shines. It just has a lot of damage that you can do from range, while you do have less mobility than other specs such as the Blue Line, which as a hint we will get to later. It is really great for bursting down mobs, perhaps killing high health mobs, and honestly just killing things very quickly on the landscape. Again, it just has less mobility and less fast-paced landscaping compared to the Blue Line Hunter, so that is one of the reasons it is here at number 9. Still, it is by no means a bad choice, and if you go with this build, you will do a ton of damage and nuke your enemies. With number 8 on the list, we have the Redline Minstrel, and I think this will be one of the first surprises on this list because the Minstrel is typically going to be seen as a squishy class and not that all high damage. Well, contrary to that belief, the Redline Minstrel actually does pretty crazy damage, and you can do all of it on the go and while moving. Now, one of the downsides for the Minstrel is it doesn't have all that much for moving. While you can cast while moving and just keep being on the run while you're questing and going through landscape content in LOTRO as you level, you cannot actually get around all that fast without any movement speed boosts or any travel skills. Another minor thing to highlight with the Redline Minstrel is its great AoE damage in addition to just overall great burst damage for leveling content in the game. Now, as far as versatility goes, one nice thing about this Redline Minstrel build is that you can get a decent bit of self-healing for that extra survivability boost when kiting alone does not work. So while it may seem odd, the Redline Minstrel really does deserve this rank at number 8. Some might argue that number 7 on any list is going to be the best, and this one is one of my favorite classes, which is the Runekeeper, and this particular build is a Yellow Line Runekeeper build specialized for going through leveling content on landscape in LOTRO, although it's definitely not a bad choice for group content as well. Now, the Yellow Line Runekeeper is very similar to the Redline Minstrel. It has similar self-healing, it has similar mobility in that you can cast all of your lightning abilities while on the go. It doesn't have anything for movement or travel, but compared to the Redline Minstrel, it has a little bit extra AoE utility with some stuns and dazes that are very valuable in content. With ranged AoE stuns with your runestone and the single skill vivid imagery, it will be no problem going through large masses of mobs on the landscape. Even with all the strengths of the Runekeeper, there is something better. Well, there are a few things that are better, and starting off here, we have our first healing slash support spec, which is the Yellow Line Beorning. This may seem like an odd choice because its biggest weakness is it doesn't have as much damage as the DPS specs, but it has some crazy survivability in that you can solo a whole lot of challenging content while you are leveling in LOTRO. So if you are a fan of soloing group content, even 6-man dungeons, then the Yellow Line Beorning may just be for you. And by the time you get to mid to high levels, the damage is not all that terrible, even though it's not competitive with a DPS spec. Of course, it is somewhat decent going through landscape. One nice thing about the Beorning is its travel options. It's not quite as good as the classes with Hunter and Warden, but you do get a port to Beorn's Lodge, which has a very nearby Stable Master, which can take you to Southbury and a whole lot of other useful places. You also do have your Wanderlust ability to travel very quickly out of combat in bear form, which is very useful. So it is a pretty decent class in terms of mobility around Middle Earth outside of combat. But again, the highlight of this particular build is just how survivable you are with the potential for some moderate damage to back it up. The Blue Line Beorning, I will give it an honorable mention for this list because while it is not quite as competitive as some of these other specs and builds, it does have some great survivability and to me personally is at least very fun, but it also really lacks in the DPS for being a top leveling build in LOTRO. Moving to number 5 on the list, we have another Yellow Line spec, and this one is almost like the opposite of the Yellow Beorning because it has some insane damage that will just help you plow and mow through the landscape. And that is basically all that the Yellow Line Champion offers. It is going to be one of those relatively slow classes in terms of mobility and being able to travel around Middle Earth, both in combat and out. It also has moderate at best survivability. You do have a couple traits in this particular build that help with that, but ultimately it's going to be a DPS class that can be easy to get in over your head if you don't kill your enemies fast enough. But that is exactly where the Yellow Line Champion shines, rounding up hordes of mobs and dealing with them in mere seconds. For an honorable mention, I will actually point out the Red Line Champion, which is very similar to the Yellow Line Champion build we have here, but of course it's focused on single target, and that is exactly why it does not make the list. While it does great for taking down a single target, it is not as good in AoE, which really helps with leveling in LOTRO, being able to kill groups of mobs very quickly. It just doesn't do quite enough to be comparable to the Yellow Line and make the list. And for number 4 on the list, we have our first repeat with the Red Line Beorning. You have all the advantages of the Beorning with some extra damage, but you do have slightly less survivability than the Yellow Line, but it's honestly not all that much. You have a good decent bit of survivability baked into the Red Line, especially with this particular build as you get to higher level, with some of our traits in the Blue and Yellow Line here. So while I may be personally biased against this spec, it is very strong contender for leveling in LOTRO with good AoE and single target damage. And it backs that damage up with some great versatility and self-healing to survive tough encounters as you are leveling in LOTRO. You know we are really moving towards the top of the list as we are getting to the Warden. This is going to be the first tank spec on this list, and it is the Blue Line Warden. The Warden class as a whole offers great travel around Middle Earth with an out-of-combat run speed buff that is second only to the Beorning. It also has ports all around Middle Earth, similar to the Hunter but slightly fewer options. And as a whole, the Warden class offers great damage, and that's even true in the Blue Line. So the Blue Line spec and build we have here for the Warden is great for survivability. Kind of similar to the Yellow Beorning, you will have a lot of survivability and be able to solo group content, even 6-man dungeons. But once again, drawing a comparison to the Yellow Line Beorning, you will do a crazy amount of more damage compared to them. The Blue Line Warden is the highest DPS tank spec in the game, and that really makes it shine through compared to these other classes and builds that we have for leveling in LOTRO. While not as strong in terms of upfront AoE damage as the Yellow Line Champion, it has a lot more mobility and versatility and survivability to back it up, giving it the number 3 spot on this list. But despite all this that the Blue Line Warden has going for it, there are better specs with the top 2. And number 2 is going to also be a Warden build, but this one's the Yellow Line. The Yellow Line Warden is insanely strong for leveling in LOTRO, at least past level 85, and that is exactly why it did not make number 1 on the list, because this spec and build is not particularly great below level 85, but after level 85, I would call it the #1 build in LOTRO for leveling. The big advantages that this Yellow Line Warden build brings to leveling content in LOTRO is being able to do great AoE damage from range. So you can be constantly on the go at range, pulling mobs and doing one attack on them and then moving on. On top of that, it actually has decent survivability options with some self-healing gambits. And with some of our particular traits, such as barbed javelins here, even those healing gambits can actually dish out some decent damage to the enemies. Compared to the Blue Line Warden, which was number 3 on the list, again, the main thing is going to be the range flexibility of this build and the great damage. But as we transition into #1 on the list, I do have to highlight again that this build is not particularly great below level 85. Now for the entire leveling range, level 1 to 85 included, we have the Blue Line Hunter, which makes #1 on the list. The Blue Line Hunter is by no means the perfect spec for leveling, but it has a lot of things going for it. So similar to the Red Line Hunter, it has some great damage, perhaps not as great as the Red Line Hunter, but what outweighs the damage with this Blue Line Hunter build is the insane mobility and versatility. So on the note of versatility, you can actually get some decent self-healing and crowd control in this Blue Line Hunter build. It won't be as much as something like the Yellow or Blue Warden, of course, or these other classes with self-heals that we have gone over with the list, but it actually has some decent options for soloing tough content. But where this really shines through is the mobility and high damage. Kind of like the Yellow Line Warden, you can just run around the landscape hitting mobs on the go and from ranged. It has slightly less AoE options compared to the Yellow Warden, but it has some great single target and burst damage. So this Blue Line Hunter build has a lot going for it while you're out and about and questing in LOTRO, but another thing that really just brings the whole thing together is its ability to port around Middle Earth, including to campfires which are spread throughout the different zones. All of this together is what really pushes it ahead of all the other builds that we have covered in this list. And that caps off my ranking of the top 10 leveling builds in LOTRO. I'd be very interested to hear your all's list in the comments. And while down there, let me know what you think I should rank next. But for this ranking, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more or becoming a channel member to support the content, and thanks for watching everyone.